Chapter 20 Suit yourself. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Good morning. With a cheerful voice, Bree walked up to Eisen, who just sat down in the restaurant to eat his breakfast, wearing his black and red shirt as well as his gray pants. "Ooh, you're in an especially good mood this morning, Eisen," she exclaimed gleefully as she looked at him sitting there with a big smile on his face. Sure, usually Eisen always smiled a lot, but even then the rest of his body was tense, fully of excitement to work, but now all that Bree could feel was happiness. Eisen laughed lowly and nodded his head in response. "Yeah, I guess I had a pretty good dream. And you seem to be the bundle of joy you always are, huh?" "Yup. You want the same breakfast as yesterday?" she asked and held up her note block to write down the order. "Yes, please. It will be right there. After a few minutes, Bree came back with 2 plates again, one for Eisen and one for herself. As she was walking up to the table, Eisen noticed the purse he gave her yesterday bound to her pants, a few small coins clattering against each other. The two of them ate together and then slowly made their way out of the inn and toward the tailor shop. After walking past Falmira and exchanging some greetings, they sat down at their regular table in the workshop. Eisen laid out the 2 designs for the clothes he wanted to work on, as well as his different tools. First, since it wouldn't take too long, Eisen decided to work on the pants for his blacksmithing outfit, which is the only part he would have to do for that for now, since the only other part was a full leather apron. He stood up and walked to the wall covered with rolls of fabric, and chose a simple, thin beige wool, and Bree made her way over to the threads and grabbed one that corresponded to the fabric's color. When they met back up at the table, Bree tilted her head. "Why did you take wool this time?" she asked curiously. Eisen smiled and began to explain. Well, it's pretty simple. Since I'll wear these when I'm working in a smithy, where sparks are flying around all the time, I need something that won't easily catch on fire. And wool is something like that." "Ooh, cool. She exclaimed and sat down next to Eisen to watch him work. Like always, he grabbed the design paper and drew what he needed to cut out of the fabric afterward. Eisen placed the template onto the wool, and cut the shape out 4 times. Like with the gray pants he made the day before, Eisen first sewed 2 of them together to create the left leg, then sewed 2 of them together to create the right leg, and then sewed both halves together to finish the pants up. Lastly, Eisen grabbed some thick string and trailed it through the waistband to create a mock belt that he could pull on and tie together at the ends to have it sit right. And with that, the pants were finished. "You created a pair of baggy pants, quality. Perfect, rank. 2, description, a pair of baggy pants created by the tailor Eisen. It is made of simple wool, and although it isn't complicated it is a truly high-quality product. Effect, +5 END, +5 AG. Alright, that's done," Eisen exclaimed with a bright smile, folding his new pair of pants and setting them aside. Directly afterward, Eisen began preparing for his next design. The suit. He first drew out the templates in as much detail as possible. For the pants, Eisen used the same tactic as always, drawing out the shape for the template, which he would then use to cut out 4 parts to sew them together. For the jacket, Eisen drew out a few different templates. One for the back, and one for both of the front parts and one for the arms, as well as a few smaller shapes for the pockets. He then moved on to the templates for the shirt. He cut out similar shapes as for the jacket, just slightly smaller and with a few differences here and there, for example using a different shape for the collar. Lastly, Eisen drew out simple templates to use for the tie and handkerchief. "Now, let's get to picking out the materials," Eisen said excitedly, and stood up, Bree skipping and giggling behind him. "Okay. They once more walked over to the fabrics, and Eisen picked 4 different ones. A relatively thick black wool, a thin black wool, and thin red silk. "I'll get the thread. Bree yelled out while she was already halfway to the thread storage, and Eisen walked back to their table. He chose to begin with the pants, and placed its template on the thick black wool, carefully tracing it with his X-Acto knife. Again, he sewed the first two pieces together to create the left leg, did the same for the right leg, and then sewed both halves together with his regular backstitch, leaving part of the front open for the fly. He flipped over the waistband to give stability and did the same for the ends of the legs, and then cut into them horizontally underneath the waistband twice in the front and twice in the back for the pockets. He also flipped them over to the front for more stability, and added some thin black fabric inside of them to turn them into actual pockets, and lastly cut small slits near the fly and added a few buttons. Done. Next. Eisen exclaimed after about 2 hours, and quickly placed the next templates, for the shirt, onto the thin black wool, and traced them out. Eisen first created something like a vest by sewing the front parts and the back together, and adding some holes for buttons to go through, which he then also quickly, but carefully, sew on. Then, Eisen cut out the fabric for the sleeves, and sewed each long end together to create a tube, with a small slit at one end where he also added a button to close it end up tightly. Afterward, Eisen simply sewed the sleeves onto the vest, finishing the shirt. Now, I only have the vest and the accessories left. You're working so quickly, Eisen. Bree exclaimed, her eyes glittering gleefully. Yeah, huh. Slowly getting to a speed my body is used to, it seems. Eisen explained. And he was telling the truth, it seemed like he was slowly getting his body to what it was in real life. The dexterity, speed, strength, and so on, now all seemed a lot closer to what he was used to. Eisen smiled and cut out the parts needed for the jacket, and basically repeated the same process of creating the shirt, finally pushing his needle through the wool, stitch after stitch, taking his time to finish the last big piece of the day. He ran his hand over the wool of the jacket and felt its reaction to his needle and the thread now running across it. And Eisen knew that usually making a suit would take days, maybe even weeks, usually, but with the help of the game system, and his extraordinary skill, he was able to finish it in only a day. Usually he would need to remeasure everything perfectly, or iron the finished items, or even go as far as redo some parts due to his fatigue the day before. But the game took care of all of these things. Even if the size was completely off, the item would fit one's body as if it was made for them. Of course, it would still fit best when it was made to be your size, but especially small areas that didn't fit were fixed instantly. There was no need to iron or clean items, since simple dirt or folds could be easily cleaned off or straightened out with a little bit of water. And he really didn't feel any fatigue like he normally would. While he was working, except if he ran out of mana, he was constantly feeling completely invigorated, and it was only when he sat down to relax that a bit of fatigue caught up to him. Eisen only had about an hour left before the shop closed, thus he now needed to hurry up. Luckily, he only had 2 more things left to make. The tie and the handkerchief. He cut out the fabric for the tie out of the red wool, and folded it over along the edges, and sewed each side together. Since this was all he had to do, the tie was now finished after barely 20 minutes, and Eisen only had the handkerchief left. He cut out a square out of the silk and grabbed some of the red thread, leaning back in his chair while he comfortably began stitching patterns into it. Alright, I'll be done soon, but it's pretty late. Do you want to go on to the inn already? I'll show you the finished suit there if you want, but I think you really should go and eat something. Eisen suggested while looking at Bree, who kept looking at him with a wide smile. No, I want to stay here with you. I was watching all day, so I want to see it being finished as well. Eisen began to laugh softly and smiled at her reaction. He wasn't really sure if this was a good thing or not. Sure, he loved her company, and it was always better to work together with someone else than alone, even if the other person was simply watching. But he also had some plans for her dress he wanted to prepare for, and it was supposed to be a surprise, since she really, really deserved it. She has gone through so many hardships, and for now the only thing Eisen could do for her was make that dress, so he wanted to make it perfect. At last, he came up with a different plan that he decided to pursue instead. Alright, fine. It's not going to be long anyway, just a few more minutes. But after that I still wanted to talk to Falmira about some things, and actually try the suit on and hear her professional opinion. That's fine. I'll wait. Huh, sure. Although, there are some things I need to talk to her about in private, so I might have to ask you to wait outside. Bree shrugged and nodded with a slight frown, sure. She pouted, and Eisen simply laughed softly, placing his hand on her head just when he finished the stitching on the handkerchief, a copy of the patterns on the coin hanging around his neck. With a smile, he stood up and looked at the finished items. You created a pair of fine pants, you created a fine shirt, you created a fine jacket, you created a fine tie, you created a fine handkerchief. For creating 5 overwhelming quality items, you gain +3 END and +2 AGI, you created the item set fine suit, description, an extremely high-quality black suit with red accessories created by the tailor Eisen. It is completely made up of perfect quality, rank 2 items. Items, fine pants, fine shirt, fine jacket, fine tie, fine handkerchief, set effect, +20 END, +15 STR, +15 AGI, +10 CHA, for creating an overwhelming quality item set. You gain +1 END and +1 AGI, tailoring reached level 100 and rank 1, upgrading to rank 2, it is now possible to work with non-conventional fabrics. Due to ranking up your tailoring skill, you gained +1 AGI and +1 END. Chapter 21 Magic Fabrics. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ha! What's this? Eisen muttered out confused. It wasn't that he ranked up his tailoring skill, there was something else that Eisen thought was more interesting. There was a stat bonus he's never seen before until now. So, he turned to a person that probably should know, since she was an inhabitant of that world. Bree, what's CHA? He asked and Bree tilted her head. Well, that stands for charisma, obviously. Oh, right, you lost your memory. Charisma is an extra stat. It's something that can't be increased with stat points, you see. You have to do certain actions so that it increases. I see. And what does charisma do? Eisen asked curiously. Charisma usually has a lot to do with interactions with other people, and how they react to you, so maybe this is something like that as well. Bree thought for a bit and then began explaining. Charisma makes others believe you more easily. There's actually a children's story about it. She exclaimed, and Eisen listened closely. And this is what Bree told him. There once was a bard, singing and telling the stories about her travels. Whenever she came into a town, people swarmed her and paid her in copper, silver and even gold so that she would say a single word. And after a while, her charisma kept climbing higher and higher, until nobody was able to deny a word she said. But then, a prince saw her beauty and wanted to marry her. He hired hundreds of people to try and bring her to him. That night, the bard stood in front of the castle with the men and women the prince hired. At first, he thought they were successful and stormed over the drawbridge to meet his love. Angered at his actions, the bard took out a dagger and stabbed the prince to death. And as if this was the most normal thing in the world, the king came out of the castle and invited the bard to eat with them, as her words even fooled the things he saw with his own eyes, just moments before. Well, that gives me a pretty good idea at what charisma does, thanks. Do many people have it? Eisen asked while scratching his beard, wondering if this will have an influence on sales as well once he would open his own shop at some point. Bree shook her head in response, saying that mainly artists, such as bards or painters, had it, although many political figures, as well as merchants also did. Eisen nodded once he got all the information he needed and stood up, clearing the table of all leftover materials and grabbing the suit to bring it somewhere so that he could change into it. Since he remembered seeing some changing rooms in the corner of the shop's front area, Eisen decided to change there so that he could show the outfit to Falmira as well. Thus, Eisen and Bree walked to the front, and Eisen stepped into the changing room, slipping out of his clothes and changing into the suit. The moment he placed the last piece of the set onto him, the handkerchief going into his breast pocket, he got a new notification. Due to a special action, the Charisma stat has been unlocked. It has been set at 10. Interesting. He muttered to himself, a smile on his face as he stepped back out of the changing room, being met with a whistle from Falmira. Wow, Eisen, looking good. And you made that just today. Pretty impressive. Falmira exclaimed as she stepped closed, taking a look at the fabrics and stitches. In the end, she sat back down and sighed loudly. You seriously made an item set that overwhelmed your tailoring skill. You're truly extraordinary. Thank you, Falmira. Ah, Bree, could you wait outside for a bit now? I have something private to discuss with Falmira. Oh. Fine. Pouting, Bree stepped out through the door and leaned against the stone wall next to the window. Confused, Falmira narrowed her eyes. Wait, why do you want to talk to me? Did you decide to become a tailor after all? She asked Hope. Filled. But Eisen quickly shook his head and began to explain. No, sorry. I promised Bree to make her a dress, but she deserves something special, not just any old dress. I didn't really know what to do, but then I ranked up my tailoring skill to 2, and it said I could now work with non-conventional fabric. I was wondering what those are, and how I can get them. I see. Well, she certainly deserves a great dress, because she's a great girl. And I won't even comment on how you got your skills so high that fast. But we don't really work with non-conventional fabrics here since they are simply hard to get, and also pretty expensive, you see. Amongst them are fabrics woven of metallic threads, monster fur, or even magic threads. I don't think metallic or monster fabrics would be a good idea. Metallic fabrics are heavy and hard to dye, so the dress won't be very pretty, and monster fabrics are usually used for barbarian-style clothes, since they still give off the magic reading and scent of the monster it comes from, letting them blend in easily. But how I said, the scent is still there and hard to get rid of. Magic fabrics, however, can be very useful, especially for a support magician with a huge mana pool like Bree. The defense that clothes made of magic fabrics give are heavily influenced by the mana pool of the wearer, so it is a perfect fit for her. She can't fight back easily on her own, and in exchange has a lot higher defense. Falmira explained quickly, and Eisen immediately thought of the possibilities but had no idea where he might get magic fabrics, so he simply asked. And where can I buy those, then? You can't. She explained simply, surprising Eisen greatly. But then she continued talking. You can't buy them, you have to make them. The demand for them is huge, so whenever a roll of magic fabrics lands on the market, they are immediately bought up, and since they are hard to make, they don't frequently appear anyway. I'm sure Moram can help you out, you know him, right? The kid from Everything Magic. Just go and ask him. He works pretty late, so you should be able to catch him at any point in the next few hours. You should be able to get the thread there, and then you can weave it into fabric here tomorrow morning. I see. Thanks for your help. I guess since I won't be using your fabrics for a while, I should pay you. How much do I owe you? Eisen asked and grabbed his coin bag, paying for all the materials he used so far. After that, he left the shop and made his way back to the inn together with Bree, ate, and then snuck out of the inn without Bree noticing he didn't go to his room yet. Moram. I need your help. Eisen yelled out through the door leading to the half-elf half-dwarf magician's workshop. As always, Moram stumbled out of the back after crashing into something, although this time his face wasn't covered in soot. Ah, yes, Eisen. You need my help. With what? Oh, nice suit. Moram asked, and thus Eisen quickly explained the situation. Magic fabrics, huh? Yeah, I do know how to make them, and I do have the materials. You know what? I'll give the fabrics to you if I can add a little something into the mix. It's going to give the fabric a special effect. And don't worry, it won't be anything crazy, but it will be pretty awesome. After finishing his explanation, Moram brought Aizen to the back room for the first time. It was filled basically everywhere with different apparitions and apparently unfinished items, ranging from pieces of armor, clothes, weapons, or even mundane everyday items, as well as some Aizen couldn't directly recognize, but found out later that they were prototypes for some items Moram tried creating. He brought Aizen to a table in the back and opened up some space on it. After that, he grabbed a box filled with crystals of different sizes, some even as big as Aizen's fists, and placed it in front of him on the table, as well as a small spinning wheel with a small opening in the center of the wheel. Alright, I guess we can take this as a few first lessons. How high did you get your mana manipulation skill? Moram asked, and Aizen quickly checked his status. It's rank 1, level 15 right now. Good, good. We wouldn't have been able to do this had it been rank 0. Those things in front of you are mana crystals. You have to infuse them with your mana, and then push it into the opening in the center of the wheel. It will automatically detect the compatible crystal, and then turn it into thread. The quality of the thread will obviously depend on the mana crystal used. I'll give you a high quality one, just because I want to see the finished item. But first, I'll prepare the mana crystal. Moram burrowed through the box and picked out a few of the bigger crystals, and placed them onto the side, and grabbed a bag filled with white spheres the size of marbles, pouring it out onto the table. One after one, Moram held the marbles in his hand, and Aizen could see a soft glow before the marbles turned into a light red bordering on pink. After that, Moram placed one of the mana crystals into his right hand and one of the marbles into his left. His hands slowly glowed once more, and the marble slowly turned into particles that mixed into the white crystal, turning it a light pink. He repeated this process until all of the mana crystals were turned into their pink state. Don't worry, it won't stay pink, Moram laughed lowly as he placed the mana crystals in front of Aizen. Now, pour your mana into it. You know tool connection, right? It basically works like that. At least that's the most effective way. You could also just exert mana through your hands and the crystal would absorb it, but a lot of it will get lost that way. He explained, and then sat down next to Aizen. Just keep your mana inside of the crystal, and constantly hold it into the hole, and switch once the crystal is gone. Aizen nodded and grabbed the first crystal. He closed his eyes and felt his mana that was spread throughout his body slowly pour into the crystal. When he opened his eyes again, the mana crystal was glowing in soft pink. Carefully, Aizen pushed the mana crystal into the opening and the spinning that will instantly began to turn and Aizen could feel the mana crystal slowly lose weight as a thin, white thread was turned around the wheel onto an empty roll. After the first mana crystal completely disappeared, one of the rolls was completely filled up, and Aizen switched it out with a new one and grabbed the next mana crystal. This continued until all of them were gone, and Aizen was left with a whole mountain of rolls covered in glittering white threads. Wow, these threads look beautiful. And they should certainly be enough to be weaved into a fabric. Aizen exclaimed as he examined the thread more closely. Yep, definitely. Magic fabrics are always beautiful. And these threads are special. Do you want to know what I infused into it? Moram asked smugly. Aizen laughed softly and shrugged, sure. Tell me what makes these so special. Moram crossed his arms and grinned. You can upgrade them. Aizen, race. Giant, dwarf halfling, occupation. None, level. 7, HP. 350, MP. 230, STR. 22, End. 28, AGI. 36, Int. 15, Wis. 16, Cha. 10, Titles, Original of the Mechanical Arts, Limit Breaker 2, Skills, A Dwarf's Hands, Rank. 1, Level. 19, A Giant's Strength, Rank. 0, Level. 1, Appraisal, Rank. 0, Level. 99, blacksmithing, rank 1, level. 58, drawing, rank 0, level. 87, mana copy, rank 0, level. 23, mana hand, rank 1, level. 42, mana manipulation, rank 1, level. 23, tailoring, rank 2, level. 1, tool connection, rank 0, level. 98, woodworking, rank 0, level. 49. Chapter 22. The dress. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Eisen frowned and tilted his head slightly at what Moram just told him. What do you mean, I can upgrade them? With a smile on his face, Moram began to explain. Well, it's pretty simple. I'll teach that to you as well when you come here again soon, but a part of what I do here is enchanting. You can't enchant mana crystals directly, but it is possible with these pearls that have a high affinity with mana crystals. So I enchanted the pearls with the absorption ability and combined them with the mana crystals, which you then use to make thread. This itself can't be upgraded yet, but once you make an actual item, like the dress, out of it, you can practically feed it more crystals. Basically, every type of crystal works, although the easiest to get are mana crystals. I've tried giving a few different items the absorption ability, and it only worked once, when I enchanted the base materials for the item rather than the item itself. I see. So the more crystals I feed the dress, the stronger it gets. Eisen asked, wondering if he understood this right, and Moram simply nodded. Exactly. It works like leveling up, basically. And every crystal holds a certain amount of experience. Of course, the bigger and higher quality they are, the more experience there is. All you need to do to put a crystal into the item is to infuse it with mana and push it against the item, and the crystal will slowly be absorbed. Simple, right? Eisen nodded in response. It really was quite simple. There was just one issue left. Eisen had no idea where to get mana crystals. Moram sighed, closed his eyes. Right, sorry. I forgot you lost your memories. Well, basically every monster has them. They can usually be found near the heart for low-rank monsters, and for some high-rank ones, it sometimes even replaces the heart completely. The ones you use to make that thread are crystals coming from rank 4 monsters. From rank 8 upward, most mana crystals have some kind of effect on them, usually an elemental one, but sometimes it has to do with the skills that the monster uses. His eyes closed as he scratched his beard. Eisen nodded. Thanks for that info, Moram. You sure you don't want money for the materials? No, that's fine. They would have been lying around in that box forever anyway. Just come here with Bree sometime so that I can see the finished product. Thanks for that, Moram. If you ever need my help, just ask away. Well, let's see if you're as talented with alchemy and enchanting as you are with other crafts, and then I might need your help with some projects if you don't mind. Moram explained while Eisen carried the rolls of thread to the front of the store with a small wooden crate. Eisen laughed softly and agreed to help with whatever Moram needed him to. I'll see you in a few days, then. Eisen yelled as he was on his way to the inn, where he went to his room and practiced his skills a little bit more, especially the combination of a dwarf's hands and mana hands. That was until he noticed one skill that has been sitting at level 99 for a few days now. Appraisal. It seemed like it would only take a few more tries until it would rank up, and Eisen was actually kind of embarrassed that he completely forgot about it. Thus, he looked at the box in front of him and used his skill. Thread, appraisal reached level 100 and rank 0, upgrading to rank 1, you will now be shown more information. Due to ranking up your appraisal skill, you gained +1 INT and +1 WS. Eisen was stunned. He literally only needed to appraise one more item, and it would have ranked up long ago. Eisen grumbled to himself and then tried to appraise the same threads again. Infused magic thread, absorption. The old man sighed out loud and continued appraising different things, such as the book on mana manipulation he got from Moram, his backpack or his tie. How to Control Your Inner Mana by Romeo Julie, red and black backpack, fine tie, well, it's more than it was before. I'll have to find out what I can see when appraising other people now. Aizen told himself as he took off his suit and set it down on his nightstand, folded up neatly, before going to bed. The next morning, Aizen walked down the stairs of the inn toward the restaurant while wearing his crafting outfit and his suit jacket over it, since he couldn't stuff it into his backpack like his other clothes. He was carrying the box filled with magic thread and set it onto the ground next to him before sitting down. Shortly after that, Bree came over and asked for his order, and came back a few minutes later with 2 plates. She seemed to be staring at the box most of the time Aizen and Bree were sitting there, and soon, Aizen sighed out loud with a soft laugh following it instantly. Those are some items I need for today. They'll make your dress extra special. He winked and swallowed the last of his eggs, while Bree's face turned from curious to completely ecstatic, a light pink forming on her cheeks. Okay. She said happily and finished her breakfast as well. After bringing the plates back to the kitchen, Bree came back out and the two of them made their way through town back to the tailor shop. Beautiful clothes. Good morning, Aizen. You brought the threads, I see. You can come right with me. Falmira said instantly she saw the crate in Aizen's arms, waving at him and Bree to follow her. She led them through the workshop to another, smaller room, where a few looms stood, most of which were already working on producing fabrics. Falmira led Aizen over to one that wasn't working on something and began explaining how the loom worked. This is a machine that was created to make fabric production far easier. It is more expensive as well, but since I can afford it, it's not a problem. These work on mana that was stored on crystals. They seem to be something different from mana crystals, but you'll have to ask Moram. I really don't understand magic very well, Falmira laughed and pointed at a few sockets. You'll have to place the rolls of thread onto these sockets, and the machine will do the rest. She explained, and Aizen got to work. He placed the rolls onto the sockets like explained by Falmira, who then simply pushed a button. Instantly, the rolls began to turn and the threads on one of the sides stretched out to the other side, were cut off on the roll side, which then moved tiny distance further to the side, repeating the same process over and over again, until all of the rolls on one of the sides were empty, and the center area of the loom was covered in thread so tightly packed it already looked like a whole fabric if one didn't look closely. After that, one of the rolls on the other side perpendicular to the first also began turning and the thread moved forward, up and down through the threads already there. Once it reached the other side, a wide piece of wood moved forward in the direction of the first threads, pushing the just woven one further to the end. And again, this process repeated over and over again, switching between the threads moving up and down to them moving down and up. Whenever one of the rolls was empty, it was discarded and the next one in the row was used to continue the weaving. After about an hour, the large piece of the fabric was finished. Aizen was sure he could make something decent out of this, but he still had 3/4 of his thread rolls left, so he placed more onto the loom and watched it finish 2 more large pieces of fabric, and Aizen decided to keep the last fourth as a backup if he needed it, as well as for sewing the pieces of fabric together. Aizen turned to Falmira after looking at the pure white fabrics, with Bree staring at them with wide open eyes and mouth, and asked. So, do you have dye baths? I need the fabrics in dark green, as well as some of the thread to be pink like Bree's hair. Alright, follow me then. Falmira smiled and brought them to a room directly next to the one filled with looms, that was instead filled with a few different tubs reeking of paint. The middle-aged dwarf walked up to a wall in front of which stood 5 big tubes. They were filled with different powders, each holding either red, yellow, blue, white or black. You said a dark green and pink. Falmira asked, and Aizen nodded, after which she immediately mixed together some of the yellow and blue, having them fade together into a dark forest green, and then mixed the red and white together until they faded into a bright pink. She showed the cups filled with the 2 powders to Aizen, and asked, Are these good? Yep, they're perfect. He responded with a nod and a smile. Falmira chuckled as she walked over to two of the tubs filled with clear liquids, and poured one of the cups into each of them. Instantly, without Falmira needing to stir the paint around in the slightest, they turned into the colors desired. She grabbed two of the sheets of magic fabric and placed them into one of the tubs, and took some of the rolls of threads and unrolled them into the paint, making sure they wouldn't intertwine. After a few minutes, Eisen noticed that the coloring of the paint-like liquids in the tubs slowly faded as they were pulled into the fabrics and threads. When the paint was completely clear again, Falmira grabbed the fabrics with some tongs and held them up for a few seconds and held her hand forward with her eyes closed, after which they dried fast that you could see the process. Eisen made sure to remember asking her about this later, but first continued watching her work, as she grabbed one of the ends of the, now pink, strings and held them against one of the rolls. She slowly rolled them back up while they dried immediately, since she was doing the same thing she did to the fabrics. Falmira handed the fabrics back to Eisen and took the rolls of thread into her hands, before walking to the door. "I'll help you carry the stuff over to your table. But show me the finished dress." Moram added something pretty interesting into the mix there, huh? She said. Eisen laughed and followed behind her, agreeing to her notion, while Bree looked at both of them with a tilted head, confused over what they were talking about. "Alright, I guess we'll get to work then, huh? But first, what?" Eisen was about to ask Falmira how much he owed her for the dye, as well as letting them use the loom, but was promptly interrupted. "Don't even ask, Eisen. It's nothing much, so just work on the dress and show it to me later." "That's exactly what Moram told me as well, He laughed and nodded with a smile on his face, then turned to the materials in front of him. He took off his jacket and placed it to the side, cracking his knuckles before grabbing his tools. Eisen first grabbed some of the design paper and drew out 3 different templates, taking a good look at Bree to get the proportions right, one for the chest area of the dress, one for the shoulder straps, one for the belt-like center part going tightly underneath her chest, and one for the flowing bottom parts that were supposed to reach to Bree's thighs. After cutting them out, he laid them onto the sheets of green magic fabric and carefully cut them out, trying to take advantage of every single bonus he could through the use of a dwarf's hand and tool connection. This even gave Eisen enough proficiency to rank up his tool connection skill, giving him another INT and WAS. He laid out the 2 pieces he cut out for the chest and sewed them together using the leftover white magic threads, and soon after that added the thin straps to hold the dress up. During the process of pushing his needle through the fabric, again and again, he made sure to expand an extra amount of magic to pour as much mana as he could into the magic threads, since he was sure that would end up giving some kind of small bonus as well. After that, Eisen placed the rectangular piece of cloth under the chest part and sewed them together, closing the belt part in the back. And lastly, Eisen was only left to sew on the rest of the dress, the main part that would cover Bree's lower body. Since now the base of the dress was finished, Eisen moved on to the decorations, the pink flowers that would cover the dress. He put the pink magic thread through the needle's hole very carefully and pushed it through the fabric. Up and down, Eisen stitched a small flower into the dress bottom. He repeatedly stitched these same flowers, creating a rim on the bottom and filling basically all of the central belt part. Soon enough, Eisen cut off the last part of the magic thread, finishing the dress at last. "You created a magic dress, quality. Perfect, level 3, description, a high-quality dress made of magic fabrics by the tailor Eisen. Since the materials used to make the fabrics themselves were infused with the absorption ability, the dress is able to grow by feeding it different magical crystals. Due to its nature as a dress made of magic fabrics, it is easier to be affected by positive spells, and less by negative spells, and the defensive capabilities grow the more mana the wearer possesses. Effect, plus 10 END, plus 5 WS, plus 5 INT, level 1, 0%, for creating an overwhelming quality item, you gain plus 1 INT. Eisen, race. Giant, dwarf halfling, occupation. None, level. 7, HP. 350, MP. 250, STR. 22, End. 28, AGI. 36, Int. 18, WIS. 18, CHA. 10, Titles, Original of the Mechanical Arts, Limit Breaker 2, Skills, A Dwarf's Hands, Rank. 1, Level. 29, A Giant's Strength, Rank. 0, Level. 1, Appraisal, Rank. 1, Level. 2, Blacksmithing, Rank. 1, Level. 58, Drawing, Rank. 0, Level. 87, Mana Copy, Rank. 0, Level. 23, Mana Hands, Rank. 1, Level. 48, Mana Manipulation, Rank. 1, Level. 23, Tailoring, Rank. 2, Level. 6, Tool Connection, Rank. 1, Level. 1, Woodworking, Rank. 0, Level. 49. Chapter 23 Leatherwork. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Eisen grabbed the finished dress while the light shining through the few windows that are in the workshop illuminated it completely. The dark green reminded him of a forest, completely overgrown with beautiful pink flowers. He held it over to Bree, and only then noticed her face. Her usually so bright and cheerful demeanor was gone and had been replaced by one that was nearly completely blank as she stared at the dress, tears slowly gathering in the corners of her eyes. Eisen placed his hand on top of her hand and scruffed her hair up a little bit, causing her to snap out of it and wipe away her tears. Bree looked up at Eisen with a soft smile. "Thank you," she muttered out quietly and leaned in to give him a hug by trying to sling her arms around him, which failed miserably because of Eisen's build. His lips immediately turned upward as he hugged her back before handing the dress to her. "Go on, get changed, I'll clean up here and be right there." Bree nodded and happily clutched the dress, taking it with her to the front of the store. Immediately, Eisen began to clean up the table, disassembling his X-Acto knife and placing the blade with his needles into their respective boxes, then stashing them away in his bag, that is ever so slowly filling up, and put his suit jacket back on. Lastly, he grabbed the crate that Moram gave to him and placed the leftover magic fabrics, even the scraps since Eisen might be able to make some interesting smaller items with them, as well as the rolls of magic thread into it. Luckily he decided to bring his Zweihander to Denmere for safekeeping when he had some spare time, otherwise, he really would not have been able to carry all his belongings at once. He really needed to figure out a way to stash away all these items somewhere safe, especially once he would start traveling around. Maybe something like a carriage would be a good idea, although he would need to either figure out where he could buy one, or where he could build one. Maybe this town also had a woodworker somewhere. Eisen figured that there should be one around, and since he already had the woodworking skill, it would be much easier to create a good carriage if he needed to. And then he would need to find something like a horse to pull the carriage as well. While walking around town the past few days, he's seen a number of different carriages, some drawn by horses, others by giant birds, and others by some kind of reptilian creatures. It seemed like all of them had certain advantages and disadvantages, and Eisen would need to figure out which ones they were. He might also consider sending Juk an e-mail, as they briefly exchanged them in case they needed to talk to each other, and ask him about them. After all, he helped to carefully design and create every life form in World of Magic. But before then, Eisen would get to learn leatherworking, alchemy, and enchanting. Since now he had his plans figured out a bit more, Eisen stepped to the front of the store and looked at Bree, who was holding her work clothes, which she had worn every single day until now. She was now wearing the dress Eisen made for her, which ended up fitting her truly perfectly. While Bree was taking her time looking at her in a mirror next to the changing room, Falmira was kneeling next to her, closely inspecting every inch of the magic dress. "Absolutely splendid," she yelled out and looked over at Eisen with a huge grin on her face. Eisen laughed and placed down the crate on the counter for the duration that they would be talking, and nodded his head. Yeah, I know. I'm guessing you can see the item description. The absorption ability definitely seems quite handy. Oh, definitely. I've only seen one or two items with the absorption ability before, and while they may not have been the most amazing item at the start, after a while they became quite strong. And the quality of the dress is already absolutely amazing, so I can't wait to see what this will turn into at some point. Falmira explained excitedly while Eisen was listening closely. He really hoped that it would become stronger since he himself was also interested in an item that would continue growing after already being finished. Eisen also was a craftsman, after all. After exchanging his enthusiasm with Falmira for a little bit longer, Eisen looked at Bree, and with a smile asked, "So, do you like it?" Instantly, Bree snapped her head toward his and nodded furiously. "Yes. I love it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. She yelled out and jumped at Eisen, dropping her work clothes in the progress, once more attempting to hug him. Eisen placed his arms around her and pulled her closer, rubbing her back softly. "Of course. You deserve it, Bree." Snuffling, Bree burrowed her face in Eisen's shirt and shook her head. "Of course you do." Eisen continued rubbing her back to comfort her, and Bree pulled her face away. "Thank you, Eisen. Nobody was ever this nice to me." She smiled, showing her pearly white teeth, and stopped hugging Eisen. "So, are you all right with us going straight to the next place to work? It's going to be leatherworking this time around. I won't be doing that much there, only the rest of the outfits and maybe some accessories or something." Eisen explained, and Bree nodded immediately. "All right. She exclaimed happily and quickly picked up her work clothes again, clutching them tightly, just before Eisen and Bree left the shop together. Only a few minutes after leaving Beautiful Clothes, the pair reached the next shop Eisen would work at, funnily enough, called Jekyll's Hides. Smiling at this superstitious sign, since the book Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde actually was one of Eisen's favorite books, Eisen stepped through the door thinking that this will be quite a nice place to work at. "Hello there. My name is Eisen, and I would like to learn leatherworking here." Eisen explained with a smile to the young man sitting at the counter. The man in response simply clicked his tongue, stood up and walked to the workshop in the back, leaving both Eisen and Bree stunned. Bree immediately began to frown and stomped her foot on the ground. "How rude. Now, Bree. Maybe he's just not a people person. Although he's sitting in the front of a store and is the first person a customer sees." Eisen muttered out to himself, quieting down at the end. After a few minutes, the door swings open and a short man, similar in height and build as Moram, walked out of the back. He had a few animalistic features, including a furry tail, as well as long hair-covered ears like that of a dog, and light brown hair and eyes. He grimaced annoyedly as he crossed his arms, showing two long canine teeth. "What are you here for?" "I'm workin'. He asked with a sharp gaze, looking at the fabrics in the crate that Eisen was holding before sighing loudly. "Wrong shop, old man. The tailor is a few minutes further up the slope." "See." Before the man, Jekyll as Eisen guessed, managed to turn around, Eisen interrupted him and began to talk. "Sorry, my name is Eisen. I actually just was at the tailor shop. I'm kind of hopping around shops to learn different crafting skills. I was hoping you could teach me leatherworking." Jekyll looked Eisen up and down and narrowed his eyes. "So ya are Eisen, huh? Those other guys mentioned you. Although you're much older than I thought. You really think your old body can take it?" Jekyll asked, obviously trying to rile Eisen up to prove some kind of the point, but Eisen simply kept smiling and scratched his beard after placing the crate on the ground. "Oh. Young man, I can assure you that I know what I'm doing." Eisen laughed out, crossing his arms with a smirk. "Do ya? Well, then let's see what you can do. Ever made a bracer before?" Doesn't matter, you'll learn it if you're good enough. New quest. Leatherwork tutorial, description. After requesting Jekyll Jackson to teach you leatherworking, he told you to create a leather bracer. Reward, leatherworking skill, experience, increased reputation with Jekyll, failure, Jekyll will refuse to teach you, time limit. None, Jekyll waved his hand at Eisen, and both he and Bree followed him to the workshop. He brought Eisen over to an empty table, and threw some simple thin, hardened leather on it together with leather strings, as well as a design and finished templates. Falmira told me you've got your own knife, so go ahead and start working. Jekyll grinned and sat down on the other side of the table, prepared to watch Eisen work. Eisen grinned and opened his backpack, grabbing the small box filled with blades and their handle. Quickly, he assembled the X-Acto knife and activated tool connection and a dwarf's hands. Sure, maybe a bit overkill for a simple bracer. He placed the long trapeze-shaped template with rounded ends onto the leather and carefully cut into it. Shortly afterward, the simple shape was cut out and Eisen added a few small cuts along each long side, and simply traced the leather string through like one would put a shoelace onto a shoe. After only about 5 minutes, Eisen finished the bracer and showed it to Jekyll. Here you go, young man. Jekyll narrowed his eyes and closely inspected the bracer. Well, it's definitely pretty good, considering how simple it is, but more importantly, you finished really quickly. And it's a perfect quality one as well. Fine. You really are good. Quest successful. Leatherwork tutorial, description. After requesting Jekyll Jackson to teach you leatherworking, he told you to create a leather bracer. Reward, leatherworking skill, experience, increased reputation with Jekyll, failure, Jekyll will refuse to teach you, time limit. None, bonus, significant rise in reputation with Jekyll Jackson, unlimited access to Jekyll's Hides workshop, bonus experience, you have earned 500 experience, leatherworking skill learned, you are now level 8, satisfied, Eisen nodded and instantly put 2 of his newly earned stat points into INT and WS each, and the last into STR. Ye can keep the bracer, there's not much I can do with a rank 0 item anyway. You better try and level your skill for now, so that you can work with actual materials. That reminds me, I'll explain the basics what the leatherworking skill allows you to do. Jekyll leaned back in his chair, his tail slightly wagging left and right, while his arms were crossed and he continued to explain. First off, monsters have ranks too. 0 to 10, like anything else. Rank 0 monsters are simple animals, like birds, cows, horses, etc., but from rank 1 on they are monsters. Most rank 1 monsters are simply rank 0 ones that have been affected by ambient mana too much though. Basically, if you tried hard enough, you could try using a dragon's leather already, but you won't be able to make a great item out of it. You can only pull the most out of an item if your skill rank is the same or higher than the monster's rank we got the leather from. Got it. Eisen scratched his beard and closed his eyes, nodding in response to Jekyll's explanation. Got it. So, if you're alright with it, I'd start working on a few more items. Need my help with anything? Since you can't really reuse leather, I don't want to waste anything just to level my skill a bit. Jekyll thought for a bit and then nodded. Yeah, there actually is something. It won't give you much proficiency, but should be enough to push you to rank 1. He explained and stood up, waving at Eisen to follow him to another room, further in the back. With a smile, he stood up and followed behind. Eisen, race. Giant, dwarf halfling, occupation. None, level. 8 HP. 360 MP. 280 STR. 23 End. 28 AGI. 36 Int. 20 Wis. 20 Cha. 10 Titles, Original of the Mechanical Arts, Limit Breaker 2, Skills, A Dwarf's Hands, Rank 1, Level 31, A Giant's Strength, Rank 0, Level 1. Appraisal, rank. 1. Level. 2. Blacksmithing, rank. 1. Level. 58. Drawing, rank. 0. Level. 87. Leatherworking, rank. 0. Level. 1. Mana copy, rank. 0. Level. 23. Mana hands, rank. 1. Level. 48. Mana manipulation, rank. 1. Level. 23. Tailoring, rank. 2. Level. 6. Tool connection, rank. 1. Level. 2. Woodworking, rank. 0. Level. 49. Chapter 24 Apron. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Jekyll led Eisen and Bree to another room in the back, filled with piles and piles of different types of leather. Alright, so here is where you'll be working for a bit. We got a big order of leather armor. Some kinda rank 7 monstrosity appeared near the capital, so there'll be a huge raid. What you'll be doing now is to prepare the necessary materials. There's a bunch of templates with numbers on them over there. You'll cut that shape out that many times for one piece of armor. Just repeat that till you're rank 1, should be enough for the apprentices to make a bunch of them. I'll pay ya as well, of course. New quest. Armor bases. Description: a monstrosity threatens to destroy the capital and they are in need of a large number of leather armors. Because of that, Jekyll Jackson asked you to use the templates to cut out pieces necessary to craft them. Make as many of them as you can. Reward: 20 copper for all pieces of a single armor. Failure: loss in reputation with Jekyll. Time limit. Until your leatherworking skill reaches rank 1, Eisen read the quest description slowly and nodded. Sounds good. Thanks, Jekyll. He exclaimed and smiled. Use this leather here. It's rank 2, but you should be able to cut it at least. And here are the templates. He explained and placed all the materials in front of Eisen, on a small table in the corner. I'll get to work right away. Eisen smiled and sat down in front of the table and grabbed the first piece of leather, as well as the first template. He placed the template onto the leather and assembled his X-Acto knife, activating a dwarf's hands and tool connection, before cutting into the leather as he slowly traced the template. Cutting through the leather was considerably harder than Eisen expected, and he had to push into it way harder than he had expected. Sure, he was still able to cut it, but he was having problems with it. With higher strength, then maybe he would be able to. Eisen suddenly got an idea, and activated a skill he hasn't used at all up until now. A skill with even lower proficiency than leatherworking, a skill he literally just got a few minutes ago. Eisen felt his body fill up with energy and veins all over his body popped out as he activated his second racial skill, a giant strength. It wasn't a great difference in strength, but it was better than nothing, and Eisen could continue working with the leather a little bit easier than before. And like that, Eisen activated both of his racial skill till they ran out, and then activated them again once their cool-down was over, giving Eisen a little bit of proficiency every time. The materials he had to work with seemed to be 2 different types of leather. One of them was thin and flexible, and Eisen figured that this would be for the different joint areas to allow proper movement even when wearing the whole armor. The other type of leather was thicker, harder, and considerably harder to work with. This would probably be the main protective surface. Just looking at the shapes and sizes of the different pieces of leather, Eisen learned a lot about what actual leather armor was supposed to look like. Sure, he did work with leather a lot before, but that was usually for decorative purposes. Sometimes he worked on the surfaces for armchairs or couches, and other times he made horse saddles or leather jackets. And this wasn't the first time he made leather armor either, but when he made it, it was decorated with a bunch of technically unnecessary parts, and probably was also not very useful in an actual fight. After all, it was supposed to be a copy of a game character's armor. This was the first time Eisen worked on purely utilitarian leather armor, and he quickly took mental notes for his own armor, already changing the design he planned for it. Eisen spent a whole 2 hours only cutting out piece after piece, getting together the pieces for 10 whole armors, and just when he finished cutting the last piece for the 10th one, he got a few notifications. Leatherworking reached level 100 in rank 0, upgrading to rank 1, it is now easier to work with higher. Ranking leathers, due to ranking. Up your leatherworking skill, you gained +1 STR and +1 END, great. Eisen exclaimed smiling and stood up, cracking his knuckles to get the tension out of them. He stood up and went to get Jekyll, who seemed to be working away on some leather armors on his own. Ha! Don't tell me you're finished, old man. He exclaimed when he saw Eisen come over with one of the baskets holding the pieces of leather. Eisen laughed and nodded, placing the basket down. Sorry, Jekyll, but I'm finished. There are another 2 baskets, I'll get them. Sighing loudly, Jekyll nodded and followed Eisen to grab one of the baskets, and then carefully looked over the pieces for the armors. They're pretty well made. Wouldn't have expected you to be so good at working with rank 2 leather, or even to finish your work until the day is over. But well, a promise is a promise, and I keep my word. 10 armors, eh? He asked and grabbed a small bag out of his pocket, pulling out 2 silver coins. Here you go. 2 silver. There's still 2 hours left before I close down the shop, so you can go ahead and work on whatever you want. But you better be sure to pay me for the materials, got it? Of course. There is actually something I was planning on making today. Do you have any leather that is especially heat resistant? Of the ones that I can work with, that is. Eisen asked with a smile after looking over the notification that his quest was successful, and Jekyll began to think. Yeah, we do. We've got rank 2 salamander leather. It doesn't have a great defense rating when you make armor out of it, but it's got amazing heat resistance. If you don't mind it having a red tint, you can grab it and work with it without needing to dye it. Eisen nodded and made his way to the leather storage, where Jekyll showed him what leather he was talking about. There were a few different base pieces, out of which only a few were the right size to make the apron out of. He needed a large piece of leather for the base, after all. Of course, he could sew together smaller pieces, but it would be preferable in a single piece. He ended up choosing to go with suede leather for the apron. After making sure it's okay for him to take one of those larger pieces, Eisen brought it out of the storage over to the table on which he made the simple bracer as well. He grabbed some design paper and a pencil and began sketching out the shapes he needed. Besides the template for the base of the apron, he also made small, square templates for the pockets, as well as some thin and long templates for the straps of the apron. Eisen placed the different templates on the leather and activated the 3 skills that he had been using since before, his 2 racial skills and tool connection. He pushed his X-Acto knife into the leather and felt some resistance, although considerably less than when he was cutting out those other pieces. Whether this was the case because of his higher skill level, or the animal the leather came from was unknown to Eisen, but he was glad that he was able to easily cut the pieces he needed to out. After cutting out all the pieces he needed to, Eisen grabbed some pre-wax thread, as well as one of his needles so that he could start sewing the pockets on, so they could hold his blacksmithing tools. He pushed his needle through the leather just like he was used to from the past few days of working at the tailor, although this was considerably harder due to the tough leather he was working with. It was weird, really. When he held it in his hands, it mostly felt completely like other leather that he was used to, but for some reason when he began working with it, it felt like a completely different material. This slightly threw his senses off, of course, but nonetheless, Eisen continued tirelessly working on his apron. He finished the first pocket in the chest area, and then added 3 more going down from the chest all the way to the bottom. After that, Eisen simply sewed one end of the first strap on his right shoulder and connected it to the main part of his leather apron where the upper end of his left hip would be, and then repeated this, connecting the strap for the left shoulder to the upper part of his right hip. And then, Eisen sewed 2 more, even thinner straps on the back on each side so that he can bind the apron shut. Eisen set the finished apron down on the table, crossed his arms, and nodded in approval. Done. You created a fireproof leather apron, fireproof leather apron, quality. Perfect, rank. 2. Description, a high-quality leather apron made by the leatherworker Eisen. Since the leather used to create this came from a salamander, it adopted its fire resistance. There are multiple bags covering its front to hold different tools. Effect, plus 3 STR, plus 7 END, for creating an overwhelming quality item, you gained plus 1 STR and plus 1 END, you overcame the limits of your skills, you have broken through the limits of 3 different skills. Limit Breaker 2 title is changing to Limit Breaker 3, title. Limit Breaker 3, description, by breaking the limits of 3 of your skills, you showed the gods you are closing in on them. Effect, plus 3 to all basic stats. For using it to create a great item, your body is pleased. Extra proficiency to a giant's body skill, with a smirk on his face, Eisen smiled and looked over the onslaught of notifications. If this with the Limit Breaker title continued with different crafting skills, it would end up quite overpowered, wouldn't it? Bree looked over the item as well, with a big smile on her face. Whoa! So cool, and the red looks super pretty. Haha, yeah, it does. But how about you? Do you want any items? I could think about making some shoes as well. Why, that you've done enough. The dress is already more than enough. Really? Bree insisted, but Eisen just laughed. But what if I make some shoes to practice? Do you want me to just throw them away? The Fei-Kin looked away and started fidgeting slightly. I guess if you make them anyway, it would be a waste to throw them away. Haha, that's more like it. But Eisen, you're so nice, but I've barely been helping you. I've got an idea of how I could, but well, for that, you would need to make an item for me. A bag. Bree muttered out uncomfortably. She already felt bad enough that Eisen was treating her so well, so asking him for his help before she could help him was a horrible feeling. Eisen tilted his head, slightly confused. A bag. A backpack, like mine. Well, something like that. But bigger, like, a lot bigger. You want to make armor, right? So you want to go out and fight. So I want to work as your carrier, and carry all of your items so that you don't have to. She explained, fidgeting with her hands while looking away. She really hoped she could help Eisen. He began scratching his beard and closed his eyes. I see. That's a pretty good idea, for sure. Sounds like a deal. Really? I'm so glad. But I won't let you just follow me because you feel obligated. If you think you owe me something, then don't come with me. Although if you want to come with me, for whatever reason you have beside obligation, then you are free to come along for a great ride. Bree looked at Eisen with a soft smile, that only grew wider and wider, until she nodded happily. Yeah. Chapter 25. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Eisen and Bree made their way out of Jekyll's hides for the day. On their way out, Eisen was stopped by Jekyll so that he could take a look at the leather apron. Just like Denmir and Falmira, Jekyll was quite shocked to see that Eisen seemingly so easily broke through the limits of his skill, especially considering the leather he was using. But in the end, Jekyll simply looked really tired and waved both of them out of the shop. He did talk to Denmir and Falmira, after all. They probably told Jekyll about Eisen breaking the limits of 2 skills already, so he might have been expecting it to an amount, but was still surprised to actually see it happen. Either way, Eisen and Bree simply made their way over to the inn again, and Eisen quickly paid for a room to bring all of his items there before eating. After setting them down and finally having his hands free, Eisen left his room again. To his surprise, he noticed a young man standing at the end of the corridor, looking out of his room. But when he noticed that Eisen saw him, he immediately panicked and pulled his head back. Trying to ignore this, since there wasn't a simple way to find out what this was all about, Eisen locked his room and stepped down the stairs, walking toward the restaurant. After enjoying a nice dinner with Bree, both of them continued talking for a while, although mostly about unimportant and casual things. About an hour later, they said goodnight and Eisen made his way back to his room. This time, after turning the corner to his room, he saw the young man from before standing in front of the door to Eisen's room. He looked to be about 20 years old, his skin was dark, and he had pointy ears like an elf. Eisen looked up some things about the fantasy game genre, just to build up his general knowledge a bit more, and from what he could tell this young man was a dark elf. His body was quite scrawny, and he was wearing dark blue clothes bordering on black that made it easy to hide in the shadows. Again, the young man immediately reacted when he saw Eisen and ran off before the old man had any chance to react. What was that about? Eisen muttered to himself and shook his head. He would need to be more careful, since it seems like there could be thieves targeting him and his possessions even in this game. Eisen stepped into his room and locked the door behind himself. First, Eisen checked all of his belongings to make sure the young man didn't manage to steal anything. Luckily, everything seemed to still be there, so Eisen sighed loudly and sat down on his bed. I really need to figure out a place I can put all of these. I can't just carry all of this stuff around with me all the time. And I definitely can't leave them in here. Eisen sighed and shook his head, lying down in the bed while he thought of how to go forward with everything. Once he made a carriage, most things would be taken care of while he's traveling. He would have a place to sleep, somewhere to put all his items, and probably also enough space to craft some items. But then there would be the problem of security. After all, Eisen can't just bring the carriage everywhere when he was hunting outside, and leaving it alone would be a dumb thing to do. There could be thieves roaming around everywhere, and Eisen didn't want to risk losing all of his items. Maybe he would be able to find some kind of magical way to make sure his items won't be stolen. Of course he could always fortify the carriage with steel to make sure it's not easily broken into, but since this is a fantasy world, Eisen wanted to take advantage of every single opportunity to make great items with the help of magic. He already did so with his own Zweihander, as he infused it with magic while making it, and with Bree's dress, which he created from something that is basically a purely magical substance. Obviously there were different ways to work with magic, and Eisen was sure he wasn't aware of the big majority of them. However, he hoped to find out more about magic when he would start working with Moram 2 days later. But that would also mean he only had a single day left to finish Bree's backpack, as well as his leather armor, as well as some shoes. Although the shoes were the thing that could probably wait the longest. There might actually be a designated shoemaker in Melro, so going there might be the best idea, and that could wait until after Eisen finished his time at everything magic. For now, maybe it would be a good idea to practice his mana manipulation. The higher it is before he starts with alchemy and enchanting, the easier he should be able to master those skills. Eisen sat back up and thought about what to do first. Maybe he could try forming things with his mana, and heighten it that way. But he simply wasn't sure what he should form. Some kind of item. Maybe an animal. Or maybe he could copy something off his own body again. Or maybe. Eisen concentrated and looked into himself, concentrating his mana in his center, turning it into the sphere he was used to. But this time, instead of going the long was through his arm, he thought maybe he could push it out through his chest immediately. He first split the mana up into 2 spheres, and carefully moved one of them forward, pushing it out of his body. Eisen felt a light stinging as his mana left his body through his chest. Carefully, he let the mana in his body expand again, and fully concentrated on the mana floating in front of him. Right now, it was like a strongly concentrated substance, so he slowly let it expand and grow, until it was a sphere with a 1.5 meter diameter. It wasn't nearly as dense as it was before, of course, and quite hard to move around at all. However, just because it wasn't as dense, it was far softer than before, and much easier to work with. First, Eisen roughly shaped the mana into a humanoid shape, a smaller sphere as a head, a big oval as a torso, and 4 long tubes with squares at the end to act as arms and legs each. Now that he had a base to work with, Eisen carefully inspected the mana inside of him, that naturally filled out every single inch of his body. Step by step, he added details to the doll made of mana, copying his own body, until something stood in front of him which he was happy with. Sure, it didn't have all details. It only had the rough body shape, similar to the mannequin that Eisen saw during character creation, just with a few simple differences. First, it was definitely Eisen's body. Although it didn't have his scars or complexities, if you knew what his body looked like, you could recognize him from looking at the mana copy. The hands and feet were just roughly in the shape of them, without toes or fingers or anything like that. The copy only roughly had parts that one might recognize as hair or a beard, but one could definitely see them as such. Eisen looked the copy up and down, and that was when he got some notifications, showing that what he did actually had a consequence. Mana copy library expanded, giant, dwarf halfling, incomplete, mana copy of giant, dwarf halfling, incomplete, grew by absorbing the copy's giant, dwarf hand and giant, dwarf heart. Immediately, Eisen noticed a shifting in the copy in front of him. First being that its hands became far more detailed and began looking just like the original copies he made of his hands. And after that, Eisen saw something form in the center of the copy's chest as it became slightly transparent. Slowly, a very detailed heart formed in its middle, and afterward the skin of the copy became an opaque white again. I see. I don't know what the incomplete thing is all about, but if it counts as a copy, can I still? Eisen muttered out to himself and slowly concentrated on influencing the copy's movement, and in return the copy began slowly twitching, although not actually moving as Eisen wanted it to. However, in return, he got something that might help with that. Mana Hand skill upgraded to Mana Double skill, resetting its proficiency to rank 1, level 1, instantly, Eisen noticed the copy, or the Mana Double, move more like Eisen himself, imitating his every move. However, since Eisen thought the Mana Hands to be quite useful, he grabbed the hands of the Mana Double and began slowly absorbing the mana he used to create it. After that, Eisen only filled his hands with mana to try if he could still use only the Mana Hands, and luckily, they soon appeared in front of him, two dismembered hands floating around. And then, Eisen slowly let the rest of his body fill out with mana, and the more his body was filled with it, the more the Mana Double in front of him grew, until the full double stood in front of him. Nodding in approval, Eisen decided to give the double more detail, by simply copying other parts of himself in the hopes that they would be taken in by the double's body. Like a scanner, he started at the bottom and slowly copied every part of himself. First his feet, then his legs, his torso, his arms, and then lastly his head, until the double in front of Eisen looked nearly identical to him, just with completely snow-white skin, and a surprising notification came up. Mana copy of giant, dwarf halfling was completed. Changing name of copy to Eisen. For completing a complex copy, your mana copy skill earned extra experience. Mana copy reached level 100 and rank 0, upgrading to rank 1, it is now possible to copy external objects, due to ranking. Up your mana copy skill, you gained +1 INT and +1 WS, nodding in satisfaction, Eisen closed the notifications and looked at the double. If he could copy external objects now, maybe it would be a good idea to give the double some clothes, seeing as right now it was stark naked, and if he wanted to use it, Eisen would prefer if others wouldn't be able to see him like that. Thus, Eisen absorbed the Mana Double and moved on to the other items in his room. He decided to try and copy the suit first. He pushed his mana out of his body and slowly moved it over the set of clothes. Now, instead of leaving it in its solid state, Eisen imagined the mana lose its solid state and turn into a gaseous one, slowly spreading it out like a mist, as this would make it far easier to move into every nook and cranny of the jacket, to copy it in every detail. He covered his suit jacket with the mist and noticed it pass right through, as if the jacket wasn't even there. That was when he got an idea. Instead of replicating the item somewhere else, Eisen simply manipulated the mist so that it would only be in the places where the jacket also was, directly giving Eisen the copy. Lastly, he simply moved the mist slightly upward and turned it into a solid state again, seemingly completing the copy. Mana copy library expanded. Fine jacket. With a smile, Aizen turned the jacket back into its mist state, and moved on to the next item, the pants. Then the shirt, the tie, and the handkerchief. Mana copy library expanded. Fine suit. Mana copy. A fine suit grew by absorbing the copies of fine jacket, fine pants, fine shirt, fine tie and fine handkerchief, and at last, Aizen also copied his shoes so that his double wouldn't walk around barefooted. Following this, Aizen summoned his mana double and tried figuring out how to actually give him the clothes. Until now, he simply filled his body with mana, but now he couldn't do that. He concentrated and pushed out more of his mana, surrounding his double with it. Then, Aizen imagined the mana suit forming around the double's body, and immediately they formed. Now, there stood a completely white copy of Aizen, wearing a completely white suit in the center of Aizen's room. Just then, Aizen began grinning, and laughing softly. The double didn't seem to expend mana anymore after its body was formed. So, Aizen made the copy slowly pick up the crate filled with the leftover materials. I guess I've got that problem figured out for now. Aizen laughed out loud while looking at his new pack mule. Chapter 26 Armor. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The next morning, Aizen stepped down the stairs wearing his crafting outfit, his backpack slung over his shoulders. Behind him, something that looked exactly the same as him when he was wearing his suit, the only difference being that he seemed as if someone pulled all color out of him. He also was wearing a backpack on his back that, like the rest of the colorless Aizen, was completely white. In its arms, it was carrying a wooden crate, filled with rolls of thread and fabric. Everyone was eyeing the pair as Aizen walked up to the front desk to return his room key, and then went to the restaurant, sitting down at a corner table. Even the colorless Aizen sat down on one of the chairs, albeit far more clumsily than the real one. It was then that the cheerful Bree walked up to the table to greet Aizen, her face just slightly twitching as she now looked at two of the same person. She stood there with her eyes narrowed down, looking back and forth between Aizen and his double, as if deeply thinking about something. At last, she nodded her head and smiled, turning to the double. "Good morning, Aizen. Want to eat the same as always? She asked, and Aizen couldn't help but laugh. "Bree, you're talking to the wrong guy." He laughed and scratched his beard. Immediately, Bree froze, and slowly turned to the real Aizen. "Right, so, the same as always." She stuttered out embarrassedly, and Aizen nodded with a smile on his face. "Yes, please. I'll explain to you what that guy over there is later," Aizen said and pointed over at his double, that was sitting there with a blank face, the crate on its lap. "Okay." Bree turned around and hurried back to the kitchen. A few minutes later she came back with 2 plates, and after thinking about which Aizen to give it, she closed her eyes and gave it to a random one. Luckily, it was the real Aizen, who thanked Bree and began to eat. "So, last night I was practicing mana manipulation. And I have the skill mana copy, which I used to copy my hands before to learn mana hands. This time around, I instead tried copying my whole body, and manipulated it, changing my mana hand skill into the mana double skill. And that over there is my mana double," Aizen explained, and then made his double wave at Bree. She looked at the double with wide eyes. "Whoa! That's so cool." Bree yelled out and looked at the double, extending a hand to feel its skin. It may have looked completely like a person's, but it felt like smooth, cold glass. "Yeah, I know. I thought, for now, that would help my problem with carrying all the stuff I need to. And I'm curious what other effects it's going to get once it ranks up, so I'm keeping it around for the day at least." "Yeah. You have to show me how to get a double later," the Fei.Kin exclaimed happily, and both of them continued to eat. After finishing their breakfast, the 2, or 3 including the double, made their way out of the inn and back to Jekyll's Hides to start their day of work. When they stepped through the door, they only saw the scowling young man from the day before sitting at the counter again. He looked up and waved them toward the door to the back, signaling that they should just go through. In the workshop, they saw Jekyll working on armors again. He looked up, and immediately his ears slightly perked up. "What the? Oi, old man. Who's your friend?" Jekyll asked and pointed over at the double. Eisen laughed and shook his head. "Don't worry about it. He's a mana double I made of myself. He'll just be standing around all day, so don't pay too much attention to him." "Got it." Jekyll muttered and moved back toward the armor he was working on. After sitting down at the table he would work on, Eisen made his double set down all the items he had onto the ground, then began having him do menial tasks, such as doing sit-ups and push-ups. While it didn't cost him any mana, he also didn't get any proficiency by having his double stand there and do nothing. Only through moving it around did some of his mana drain and his proficiency for the skill go up. Thus, so that he wouldn't run out of mana while crafting, Eisen turned over to Bree, asking her if she could give him some mana again. She agreed happily while Eisen got to work. He grabbed some design paper and began drawing up the templates for parts of the leather armor. For the chest piece, Eisen decided to split it up into two main parts: his chest, and his abdomen. For each part, he drew up two templates, one for the back and one for the front. For the shoulders, Eisen drew up a few more templates. There was the part which Eisen would place over his head, that would protect his neck and hold the shoulder protectors, which were each made up of 4 parts. 3 that would be layered together like scales, and then one that would partially prevent an attack aimed at the neck from the side. Eisen decided to leave his arms mostly free, as this would allow for the most freedom of movement while wielding a weapon. But to still protect some important areas of his arms, Eisen drew up templates for 2 pieces, one for his upper arm and one for his forearm. For his upper arm, Eisen simply drew up a template in a rough diamond shape, as well as something for a strap, and for his forearm, Eisen prepared the templates for a simple bracer. At last for the chest piece, Eisen drew up a template for something like hip protection, that could protect against attacks in gaps between the chest piece and the pants. And then, Eisen moved on to those pants. For its base, Eisen drew up the same template he always used when making pants, but for higher defense decided to add certain other elements. He added templates for thicker leather to add to the back and front each, making sure to leave space so that he could still move properly around his knees. Once that was done, Eisen began looking through the storage to find good leather to use. In the end, Eisen chose to go for the leather of something called an earth bull. A simple bull infested by too much ambient earth element mana, changing its bodily structure. While it had a layer of rock and dirt covering its body, its hide was still that of an animal, albeit many times stronger, but just as flexible and light as normal leather coming from a bull. Of course, Eisen didn't just know this, and Bree had to explain to him what it was. Eisen chose 2 different types of leather of that origin, one being thin and more flexible, and the other a bit thicker and harder, although both from that same monster. First, Eisen chose to cut out all parts of the armor, and then assemble them later. He deliberately placed his tools further away, so that he could make his double grab them for him. Thus, it went over to Eisen's bag and grabbed the wooden boxes containing needles and blades for the X-Acto knife, as well as the knife's handle. Carefully, as he was trying to heighten his control over the double, Eisen had the double assemble the knife as well. And although this proved quite hard at first, after a little bit of fiddling around, Eisen managed to push the blade into the handle and close the lock. After the double handed the real Eisen the knife, he slowly began to cut out the pieces of leather with the help of the templates he made before, dividing them into piles depending on what part of the armor they belonged to. After cutting each part out using the 3-skill combo of a dwarf's hands, a giant's body and tool connection, Eisen cut small holes into some parts of the pieces, and then disassembled the knife and made his double grab thread in his needles. Once the double managed to put the thread into the needle's hole and gave it to Eisen, the craftsman began to sew the pieces of leather together using the strong, waxed thread. After the main parts of the chest piece were sewn together, Eisen put thread through the lower front of the abdominal part like one would for a shoe, so that he could later properly close it, leading to a nice and tight fit. Next, he made 2 of the shoulder pieces, simply by overlaying 3 of the scale dot-like pieces together for each part, and then sewed the piece meant to protect against sideways sword slashes, before sewing both parts onto the circular neck dot protection. For the upper arm protection, Eisen simply sewed the straps onto the diamond dot-shaped pieces of leather. As for the bracer, Eisen cut out the template twice for each one before and sewed the 2 pieces together on one side, and once more traced the thicker string through the other sides in a way similar to a shoelace, so that he could close it tightly. To decorate arm protectors, Eisen simply sewed the pattern of his coin onto them, giving the armor his trademark. After that, Eisen began working on the hip protectors. For each side, left and right, he cut out 2 pieces which he then simply sewed together, and sewed those 2 pieces together in the back, adding more string in a shoelace dot-like way in the front so he could close it. At last, Eisen moved on to making the pants. He sewed the 4 base pieces made of the thin leather together, leaving a gap where the fly would later be, but instead of button dot holes added the lace string. After finishing the base, Eisen sewed the thicker leather onto it in 4 main pieces per leg. The front and back of the thigh, the shin, and the calves, each piece slightly curving around the outside of the leg. Now, the only piece left would be boots, that Eisen would make once he found a shoemaker. But for now, the armor was finished. You created a leather cuirass, you created 2 leather bracers, you created 2 leather pauldrons, you created 2 leather spaulders, you created leather folds, you created leather pants. For creating 9 overwhelming quality items, you gain +3 STR and +6 END. You created the item set, grounded leather armor. Description: an extremely high quality leather armor created by the leatherworker Eisen. It is completely made up of perfect quality, rank 2 items. Due to the leather's origin, it has retained some of its beast's peculiarities. Effect: when all items worn, +25 STR, +35 END, +30 AGA, grounded trait, items, leather cuirass, 2 leather bracers, 2 leather pauldrons, 2 leather spaulders, leather folds, leather pants. For creating an overwhelming quality item set, you gain +1 STR and +1 END, trait. Grounded, effect, makes it harder for the user to be pushed away from his standing point. Activation: both soles of the feet fully on the ground. Leatherworking reached level 100 in rank 1, upgrading to rank 2, it is now easier to work with higher ranking leathers. Due to ranking up your leatherworking skill, you gained +1 STR and +1 END. Eisen laughed loudly and looked through the notifications, waving away those that he expected, and keeping the item set and trait descriptions open. Proud at what he made, he nodded and looked over at his double. The easiest way to store this armor was very obvious. Wearing it would be the best option. Eisen slowly made the suit jacket, shirt, tie, and handkerchief disappear, and put the cuirass, bracers, pauldrons and spaulders on it. After that, he made sure that nobody was looking in his direction and told Bree to look away as well, and made the suit pants disappear as well, and quickly made the double put on the leather pants. Eisen wasn't sure if the effects of items also counted for his double, but he made a mental note to try and find out soon. "Whew! That looks so cool!" Bree exclaimed with a wide smile and looked closely at the armor which the double was wearing. "Yeah, haha. It did really turn out great." Eisen laughed and scratched his beard, moving the scraps of leather which he didn't need anymore away, then began preparing to make Bree's backpack. Chapter 27 Double Up. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. In order to prepare for making the giant backpack, first Eisen grabbed some paper to draw a design on it, asking Bree what it was supposed to look like. First, for scale, Eisen drew a simple version of Bree on the paper, and then next to it began working on the general shape. Bree wanted it to be kind of spherical, with a flat back where the straps to hold it would be, and its height nearly as tall as Bree's own. Although unsure if she was able to manage it, but knowing that there was something like a strength stat that probably allowed inhuman strength if it was high enough, Eisen simply sketched everything as Bree wanted him to. She wanted there to be a few big pockets on its side, to hold the most important items during a hunt. And that was basically it. The only extraordinary part about the backpack was its size, other than that it seemed fairly normal and simple to make. Satisfied with the design, Eisen thought about the materials he should use to make it. Overall, a suede leather would be the best choice, in his opinion. Overall, he needed a thin, flexible, but strong leather, although for the flat back and bottom, a thicker and inflexible one to act as a base, holding the whole backpack in shape. Next, he split it into different parts, to get a general idea of what templates he needed to draw, and then simply nodded before getting to work. He first drew out the 3 templates for the base. A rounded square for the back and bottom, and another one, just a slight bit larger, for the outer walls, and then another one for the lid on top, as well as 2 thin, elongated rectangles for the straps. After that, Eisen drew up simple squares for the bags on the side of the backpack. Once that was done, Eisen had a good idea of how much leather he needed and made his way to the storage. There, Eisen and Bree chose what leather to use together. After looking through the different types for a while, Eisen chose to go for the leather of the rank 3 monster, Pteranodon. Looking through the different rank 3 and 4 types of leather, Eisen was really surprised to see that there were different dinosaur names in there, since apparently, those were still a thing in the game. It seemed like there were still stronger elemental versions of dinosaurs, like for example the Fire Tyrannosaurus, but those were far too high in rank for Eisen to work with their leather. So, Eisen simply went for Pteranodon leather, as it was a monster that did possess a small amount of air element mana, albeit not enough to rank up into a different type. And while it was technically reptilian, its leather didn't have the look of normal reptilian leather, since its skin was far smoother than that of other reptilians. He picked up the different leather types that he needed and carried them back to the table with the help of his double. Immediately, Eisen began to work and cut out the different pieces with the help of the template. And this time around, he really had to activate his 3-dot skill combination, since this leather was far harder to cut than the rank 2 leather while his skill was still rank 1. He cut out the rounded squares for the back and bottom out of the thick and inflexible leather twice, the ones for the walls out of the thin and flexible leather 3 times, and then a rough rectangle for the lid and then for the 2 straps. He then simply cut out enough material for the 4 bags on the outside of the backpack as well and began assembling the bag. First, Eisen sewed together the thick and inflexible parts, connecting them at one side each, and then added the 3 wall parts all around. At last, Eisen also sewed the lid to the top of the back and cut a few small holes in the front of it so that it can be closed with buttons, which he then also quickly added. After that, he assembled the pieces for the outer bags and sewed them onto the backpack. In the end, each of the bags was the size of a small backpack on its own. And in the end, the 2 straps were sewed on and the backpack was finally finished. You created a giant leather backpack, quality. Perfect, rank 3, description, an extremely high quality, giant backpack made by the leatherworker Eisen. It is made of the leather of an airborne monster and retains some of its peculiarities. Effect, plus 10 STR, plus 5 END, lightweight trait, for creating an overwhelming quality item, you gain plus 1 STR, trait. Lightweight, effect, items stored in the bag will be lighter than usual, activation, constant nodding in satisfaction. Eisen looked at the enormous backpack, making sure there aren't any mistakes that the system ignored for some reason, and then handed it over to Bree. Here you go, little lady. He laughed out, and Bree happily grabbed the backpack, immediately putting it on her back. Thank you so much. This is great. It's way better than my last backpack. She exclaimed and jumped forward to hug Eisen. No problem, Bree. It's getting relatively late, though. The leather armor especially took up a lot of time. Should we get on our way? I want to get over to Denmer's smithy for a bit to add something to my sword with the leather I now have. And maybe now I can bring my sword with me. I can have my double carry it around. Eisen explained while cleaning up his workspace, putting some of the leather scraps into his bag. Seeing this, Bree slightly panicked and began to stutter out. Why don't you can give your items to me? That's why I wanted the backpack, after all. She said in a low voice, and Eisen smiled and nodded. Right, forgot about that, huh? He placed his tools and clothes from his backpack into Bree's and put the scraps of leather into his own again. Let's go, he exclaimed and made his way out of the workshop, Bree and his double following behind. On their way, he stopped by Jekyll and paid for the materials, which amounted to quite a sum. Now seeing that he was running low on money, Eisen wondered if he could make some at Moram's shop from tomorrow on. Eisen, Bree, and the double now finally left Jekyll's hides and went back to the other slope, toward Dwarf's Delight. They reached the shop after around half an hour, and when they stepped inside saw the young human woman sitting at the counter, the same as every day that Eisen was working at the smithy. Hello, dear customer. How can I? Ah, Eisen. Welcome back. She exclaimed, and when she saw Bree simply smiled at her, trying to ignore the snow-white-skinned man wearing leather armor behind them. Thank you. I hope everything is going well here. Yep. After you left, Denmere actually got really pumped up and made some really good items. The other smiths said they haven't seen him like that in years. Well, then I'm glad I could be of some help. Eisen laughed out and then made his way to the back, walking over to Denmere who seemed to be working away on some kind of blade. The moment he saw Eisen, though, he dropped what he was doing and walked up to Eisen. How's it going, old timer? Ye here to make some great item again? Not this time around. I'm here for my Zweihander. Wanted to put some leather on the handle as well, and then get back to the inn for the day. Tomorrow I'm starting at Moram's shop. Eisen explained, and the dwarf laughed and made his way to one of the walls, where Eisen's Zweihander was hanging. There you go. It really is a fine piece of steel. Denmere laughed as he handed Eisen his sword. Eisen nodded and smiled, it turned out pretty well, huh? Well, I don't want to keep you from working. And I tell ya, just come by whenever you want to work in here a bit. Denmere smiled as he walked back to the sword he was working on, and Eisen nodded and walked to the back workshop, where some of the apprentices were working on smaller stuff like handles. Eisen got out the leather from his bag and Bree immediately gave him the assembled X-Acto knife without him having to ask for it. He smiled and then moved back to the leather. He grabbed the longest piece left over from the earth bull leather and cut it into a long, thin strip, and after repeatedly testing if the length is enough began to place the leather strip around at the hilt. Eisen grabbed a jar filled with white glue and carefully covered the bottom of the leather strip with it. After that, he carefully placed the end of the strip at the front of the hilt and began to wrap the leather around it. Once he was finished, he set the sword back down to let the glue dry, and soon enough it dried up, setting tightly around the wood. And although there was no notification, Eisen was satisfied. That's a really pretty sword, though. Bree exclaimed and Eisen laughed before he swung his sword over his shoulder, making Bree tilt her head. Don't you need a sheath for it? Eisen shook his head as he walked out of the workshop. Nope. You don't put a Zweihander into a sheath, you carry it like this. The same as you would a halberd. Ooh. Cool. Bree smiled and followed Eisen, the double in tow. After saying goodbye to Denmere again, they made their way back to the inn and ate dinner together. Before Eisen and Bree said goodbye, they agreed on letting Bree keep the items with her at night, simply because Eisen trusted her. After that, he and his double made their way back to his room. Eisen sat down on his bed and took the leather armor off of the double. Alright, what should I do now? You're nearly rank 2, and I want to see what happens once you are. Eisen muttered to himself while putting the mana-copied suit back on his double. He felt like using skills in combination with it might be the best idea, as it helped immensely increase the proficiency for his mana hands when he tried using them with a dwarf's hands. And considering that his other racial skill, a giant strength, was due to rank up soon as well, Eisen figured the best idea would be to use his double and his 2 racial skills together. He activated both of his skills, and felt power surge through his body and hands, but nothing happened. Not even the thin thread he saw connect to the mana hands before. Maybe he couldn't use them in collaboration anymore. Aizen thought that might be a possibility, albeit a highly unlikely one. Then Aizen concentrated on his double more, thinking that he wants his skills to activate for it too, and only then did the connection activate. A thin thread made of mana now connected him and his double bulges forming and moving forward as if Aizen was pumping something into the body made of mana. Immediately, Aizen saw a small difference in the double's movement, as it was moving more delicately and was far easier to control. That was when Aizen had an even better idea. Since making the double do things gave it a lot of proficiency, Aizen figured it was a good opportunity to test something else out as well, and made the double pick up the Zweihander, holding it in front of itself. He made it pick up simple stances, some to potentially block things, and some to prepare for an attack. Aizen wasn't sure how he would be able to control the double in actual battle, but for now, everything seemed to be working out quite well. Mana double reached level 100 in rank 1, upgrading to rank 2, another double for every rank. Due to ranking. Up your mana double skill, you gained +1 INT and +1 WS. A giant's body reached level 100 in rank 0, upgrading to rank 1, your body grew stronger at all times. Due to ranking. Up your a giant's body skill, you gained +1 STR and +1 END. Chapter 28 Archivist. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. 3 men stood in a room. They looked completely identical to each other, beside a single small detail. One of those men had rosy cheeks and gray eyes, while the other 2 were white as snow all the way through. It was Aizen together with both of his doubles made of his mana. At first, Aizen thought this would be a great opportunity. Once he started hunting or large constructions, 2 people that felt no pain and that Aizen didn't need to exchange plans with would be an amazing resource. But then, when Aizen actually tried controlling both of them, he failed miserably. The only thing that was possible was to have them both act in synchronicity, but having them act out 2 tasks independently of each other was rather hard. Only when Aizen gave them commands of repeating actions was that possible. Otherwise, it would basically be like Aizen had to perfectly multitask, which he obviously wasn't capable of. So until he ranked his skill up again and gained some kind of new function that would make the doubles easier to control, Aizen decided to simply keep them around and have them continue doing menial tasks, or try and have them craft small items. For now, Aizen would unsummon them and go to bed, so that he could start his day at everything magic. The next morning, Aizen stepped down the stairs of the inn, his 2 doubles, one of them wearing the mana suit and the other the leather armor, behind him, and sat down at a table in the inn. Of course, everyone was staring at the triad of Aizen's, but he simply ignored it and waited for Bree. She came out of the back and greeted Aizen, as well as the doubles. Aizen thought it was kind of cute, considering they just stared blankly in the empty void in front of them, but he simply laughed and greeted Bree back. After making sure that Aizen wants to eat the same thing as every morning, she hurried back toward the kitchen, and a few minutes later came back out with her new backpack on her back and wearing her dress. She set the backpack down on the ground and began to eat the same time as Aizen did. There actually was something that Aizen meant to ask for a while, and he thought now might be a good opportunity. So, Bree. I was wondering, but does everyone know so much about different monsters or spells? He asked while continuing to eat. In response, Bree shook her head and began to explain. Most of it is common knowledge, but I know more than most others. When I first started as a carrier and supporter, I thought it might be a good idea to study up on different things. I learned about most common spells, even if I never managed to use them, about what monsters are most common in what region, and how to detect traps. Because of that I also got my occupation. I'm actually a, archivist. Heh. Archivist. So that means you can store knowledge or something like that. Kind of. By becoming an archivist, I got some new skills. For example, scanner. It lets me literally scan my surroundings, and saves it into databank, another skill of mine. That lets me look at all saved information at all times. By using scanner, it makes it easier to find things like traps as well, so that's good, right? And I can instantly see what items we might get from monsters, and how much experience each monster gives. But when I use it, I can only see the outlines of things. That's why I didn't recognize you yesterday and mistook your double for you. I made it a habit to use it a lot to get used to it, to make it easier to walk around with it active. Bree explained, and surprised Eisen in the process. He didn't mean to be insulting, he did know that Bree was smarter than she let on, but he didn't expect her to literally have a class that needs her to know stuff. But that would only be more helpful to him. As he never knew much about video games before starting to play World of Magic, besides making an outfit, armor or weapon from games every once in a while, he thought having a literal spring of knowledge about the world he was in would be an immense help to him. Eisen also couldn't help but wonder if this was deliberately set up by the programmers of the game, or even by Ari personally, but he tried to ignore such thoughts for now. He nodded while scratching his beard. Interesting. Is that why you were so interested in what I was doing the past few days? Bree fidgeted a little bit and then lowly muttered out her response. Well. Yeah. It was mostly because it was you, and you seemed so nice, but I also thought it might be a good way to learn about crafting. I didn't really have the chance to do that in the past, so I'm really happy that I do now. She smiled happily and finished her breakfast at the same time as Eisen. Bree stood up and brought the plates back to the kitchen, immediately returning to Eisen and his two doubles. On their way out of the inn, Eisen continues the conversation. I would have thought that someone like an archivist would be pretty popular amongst adventurers or hunters, especially beginners. You could give them a lot of vital information, right? Bree's face turned red and she began to fidget with her hands. Well, that's the thing. Usually, yeah, but I may know a lot of things through my skills, but I forget to tell others. Or I forget to scan things. Or I forget to actually check what I scanned. People call me an airhead a lot, hee. She laughed embarrassedly, and Eisen simply returned with a loud version of that. Ha, I get it. I tend to forget my surroundings as well a lot of the time, especially when I'm working. Oh, yeah. I noticed that. When you were working, you just stared at the item, and barely even looked up. Bree exclaimed proudly that she noticed this, and placed her fists on her hips. Eisen, Bree, and the doubles now slowly walked through town, getting weird looks from passers-by every once in a while. Taking their time, they soon enough arrived at their destination, Moram's shop, Everything Magic. When they stepped through the door, they saw Moram pick up a few books from the shelf, deep in thought. Good morning, Moram. Eisen yelled out, immediately startling the elf, dwarf halfling and causing him to drop the books he just grabbed. Moram turned around and looked at the four people standing there. Then he rubbed his tired eyes and looked back at the two people and two mana constructs standing there. Ah, sorry. Good morning, Eisen. And Bree, as well. Also, I see you already got your mana double skill to rank 2. Good, that means your mana manipulation skill should be at least rank 1 as well. He asked and walked closer, carefully looking at the two doubles with deep interest. Pretty detailed. So I guess you figured out the easiest way to make them. With mana copy. Moram wondered, grabbing forward and touching the suit of one of the doubles to test its density. Eisen smiled and nodded. He was surprised at first, but after thinking about it, it was more than obvious that Moram would know about this kind of thing. After all, he ran a shop for which he had to be quite versatile in any type of magic, and thus needed to know about such basic things that Eisen managed to figure out so easily. Exactly. I was looking for things to make out of mana, and then copied things off of my body. So then I got the mana hand skill, and then later turned it into the mana double skill. Once Eisen explained his simple process, he heard a slap directly next to him. He turned his head to the right and saw Bree, who just facepalmed herself. Sorry. I just noticed how obvious that was. She muttered out with a red face. Huh, Bree, don't worry about it. You have a different understanding of magic than others, right? Obviously, you can more easily learn some things, while others are completely incomprehensible to you. I guess. Bree smiled and placed her hands behind her head, strolling across the room curiously. Taking that moment, Eisen turned to Moram. So, she's an archivist. Doesn't really fit Bree, right? Moram laughed lowly and nodded, as he completely understood what Eisen meant. Yeah, I thought the same when I heard that the first time. Usually, archivists are highly focused researchers or scholars. Bree, on the other hand, well. She's a lovely girl, but let's be honest, she's not the smartest. I feel horrible saying that. But well, she isn't a fast thinker, but she's got great long-term memory. That makes sense, I guess. I just really didn't expect it. But as long as she's happy with her occupation, everything is fine, right? Eisen laughed, and Moram simply nodded in response. Exactly. Well, either way, shall we get to work for the day? I think starting with alchemy would be the best choice for now. For the beginner stages at least, all you need is to be able to push mana out of your body. More complicated stuff starts at rank 2 or 3. Moram explained and waved Eisen to the back of the shop, also making sure that Bree noticed they were going to the next room. Ah! Wait a second, that reminds me. Bree, your dress. Moram yelled out, and immediately squatted down, looking closely at Bree's dress. Of course, it startled her at the start, but she figured there was a reason for Moram's behavior, so she let him do as he wanted. After a few seconds of closely looking at the fabrics, Moram nodded in satisfaction. A truly amazing work. Great job on that, Eisen. And I'm glad that the absorption seems to have been carried over. If you two don't mind, I would like to see its change when it levels up. I've got more than enough spare mana crystals for that. Eisen looked over to Bree, and she simply shrugged, indicating that she doesn't mind. After all, why would she mind her dress becoming stronger? Eisen scratched his beard and nodded, yeah, of course. It would be nice to see how that works anyway. For now, though, how do I get the alchemy skill? Right. The basics of alchemy are to use materials and transform them into something else, something more useful to our goal. One way, one of the simplest and most basic ones, has a lot to do with herbalism. You take different plants and herbs with natural effects, and pull those effects out of them, mix them together with others, and create a potion. Health potions, mana potions, strength potions, basically everything that can be increased through magic, can be found in the form of a potion. Some high-grade potions also need different, non-herbalistic materials, but that's stuff for a higher rank. Moram explained while setting up the tools that they would need soon. And that's what you'll be doing today. I suggest just repeatedly making and refining simple potions. Let's start with a fairly simple one first, a health potion. New quest. Alchemy tutorial, description. You asked Moram Marson to teach you alchemy, and he told you to create a simple health potion to start off with. Follow his instructions to the best of your ability. Reward, alchemy skill, experience, increased reputation with Moram, failure, you will have to try again, time limit. None. Chapter 29 Potions. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. With a smile on his face, Eisen nodded and looked at the equipment in front of him. There were 4 main parts that seemed important. A mortar and pestle, a bowl, a glass flask, and a simple distillation system. Moram placed a small linen bag on the table that gave off a strong herbal scent. Alright then, the first step is to choose the proper ingredients for the potion you want. Right now we will be working with Amran, a common plant that accelerates healing by a tiny amount if ingested naturally. Through alchemy, it's possible to take those healing properties and turn them into a potion. As a note, so you just know that already, in higher grade potions you usually combine a few plants with similar properties to create more potent potions. However, if you're not careful, instead of a potion you get poison. Anyway, start with grinding down the dried amaranth petals into a fine powder. Use the whole bag, it's already been measured. After Moram's explanation, Eisen nodded and poured the whole bag into the mortar and pestle, and then slowly began grinding down the vibrant red petals. After a few minutes, they were a fine powder similar in substance to flour. Now, pour it into the bowl, and then we'll grind down the next ingredient, Moram said, and took out a few small, rice-grain-sized crystals. Again, these are mana crystals. These come from very low-level rank 1 monsters. There aren't many uses, but they're more than enough for a low-grade potion. Grind them down until they're of a similar consistency as the amaranth powder. Curious about the effects of the potion he would make and excited that he was learning something relatively new, Eisen simply ground down the mana crystals and then added them to the bowl. And now? He asked with a smile. Next, we add water to the bowl, and then make sure that the powders mix into the water properly. Then, that mixture will be put into that glass flask. Moram said and leaned against the wall, carefully looking at what Eisen was doing, while Bree was excitedly watching Eisen's process. Eisen nodded and did as Moram explained and added some water from another bowl into it, and then carefully stirred the powder into it, slowly turning the water into a light red bordering on pink. After that, he poured the contents of the bowl into the flask, and then looked to the side to wait for the next step. Moram noticed this, walked up to the table and placed the flask onto a small metal tripod. He then hooked the top of the flask into the distillation system made up of simple glass tubes leading into another glass container. Underneath the flask, Moram placed a small, red crystal and infused some mana into it, causing a small flame to shoot upward. Now, we wait. The water inside the mixture will begin to boil and evaporate, leaving a thick substance in the flask, which will then be put into a small glass bottle, and the potion will be finished. Moram explained, and Eisen smiled. This was a nice, relaxing process to him, watching the liquid in the bottle slowly bubble up and steam fill the tubes, dropping down water into the container at their end. After a few minutes of this, only a thick, deep red liquid was left in the flask. Following Moram's instructions, Eisen grabbed the flask and poured the potion into a small, thumb-sized glass bottle, and then put a small cork on the opening. You created a low-grade health potion, quality. Perfect, rank 0, description, a simple low-grade health potion made of the amaranth flower. Effect, recover 100 HP, perfect quality, I'm not surprised, really. Both the amaranth powder as well as the mana crystal powder ended up very uniformly, and the grain size of both of them was basically identical to each other. When mixing the powder into the water, you made sure that it truly integrates with it, instead of just stirring the water a little bit. You did everything right instinctively. Great work, Eisen. As expected of you. Moram exclaimed and smiled brightly, causing a notification to pop up. Quest successful. Alchemy tutorial, description, you asked Moram Marson to teach you alchemy, and he told you to create a simple health potion to start off with. Follow his instructions to the best of your ability. Reward, alchemy skill, experience, increased reputation with Moram, failure, you will have to try again, time limit. None, bonus, significant rise in reputation with Moram Marson, unlimited access to everything Magic's workshop, bonus experience, you have earned 500 experience, you are now level 9, alchemy skill learned. Eisen smiled and read through the messages, put 3 of his new stat point into WIS and the other 2 into INT, and then looked back at Moram. Thanks. So, I guess at the start the only things I can make are low-grade potions. The dwarf nodded and began to explain. Yep, exactly. Rank 0 work is really just grinding things down, mixing them together, and boiling them. They are fairly simple processes, and as you just saw don't require the alchemy skill in the slightest. At rank 1, the need for you to start using your mana will come up, so once that happens, let me know. For now, just make health and mana potions, they're the easiest, and I've got a huge supply of Amaran and Byron. 10 of each should get you to rank 1. And I'll pay you for them, they are a great base for other high-grade potions. New quest. Health and mana potions. Description: in order to get you to rank 1 in alchemy, Moram suggested that you make 10 health and mana potions each. Reward: 5 copper per potion. Failure: you have to pay for the wasted ingredients. Time limit: none. Sounds good. So I need to repeat the same thing I did for the health potion for the mana potion, and just replace the Amaran with Byron? Eisen asked, and Moram simply smiled and nodded. Yep. Oh, and once you're done with one potion, just clean the flask with some water. And save the water that has been distilled out of the low-grade potions. I recommend doing all health potions, pouring the water into some other container, and then do the same for the mana potions. I'll explain why later once you're done with this. Well, that makes me quite curious. But I'll get to work then. Also. Do I just need to put mana into that crystal down there to light it up? Oh, right. You probably never used one of those. It's a simple mana crystal that has been infused with a flame enchantment. I'll teach that to you when we get to enchanting as well if you want me to. That would be great. Thanks. Eisen smiled and scratched his beard, while Moram placed 3 bags on the table. There's enough for 10 doses in each of the 2 herb bags, and the other one has enough mana crystals for 20 doses. Just split it up. I'll be up front, I'll take today to read up on some of the basics again, it's been a while since I've done low-rank stuff. It's getting me excited, Moram laughed and made his way back to the front of the store, leaving Eisen, Bree, and the 2 doubles standing there alone. Eisen and Bree each grabbed a chair and sat down, while Eisen began having the doubles do tasks to give proficiency to the skill. One thing that Eisen found the day before, was that especially having them use strength for whatever reason gave a lot of proficiency. So, one thing that Eisen thought would be a good idea, is having them use strength against each other. He had the doubles grasp each other's hands and push forward with all their might. Of course, since they had the exact same amount of strength, neither could overpower the other, but that didn't change the fact that they needed to use strength against each other. And while it didn't give a lot of proficiency, it gave a steady amount and didn't require too much mana from Eisen, allowing him to continue his work without worrying about running out. First, Eisen began to split up the ingredients. He emptied the bag filled with the dried Amaran on the table and split it up into 10 piles, and did the same for the mana crystals, splitting them in half first, and then 1/2 into another 10 piles, putting the rest back into the bag. Eisen started grinding down one portion of the dried Amaran petals and then put the powder into the bowl, ground down some of the mana crystals as well and added them to the other powder. After that, Eisen added a little bit of water and made sure the powders both managed to mix into it. Once that was done, Eisen poured the mixture into the glass flask and placed it on top of the metal tripod, connecting the opening to the distillation system, and then looked at the red mana crystal underneath. He placed his hand next to the crystal and began concentrating, pushing his mana out of his hand into the crystal, and a small flame sparked up and began to heat up the mixture. Taking the time it took the mixture to begin boiling, Eisen decided to prepare the next mixture, grinding up the ingredients and properly mixing them together inside of the water. Once he was done with that, the water in the flask had been fully evaporated and Eisen could boil away the water in the next mixture, of course only after cleaning the flask. He repeated this process until all the materials for the health potion were used up, and then moved on to the mana potions. He emptied the bag containing the Byron on the table. While the Amaran petals looked a lot like rose petals, as they were red and about their size, the Byron petals reminded him more of those of a blue hydrangea. After grinding up those dried petals, mixing them with ground-up mana crystals, and mixing them together with water, Eisen exchanged the container filled with the distilled water with a new one and began to boil the water out of the mixture. After about 3 hours, Eisen was done and had 20 small glass bottles standing on the table in front of him, half filled with vibrant red health potions, while the other half was filled with vibrant blue mana potions, and just as he put the cork on the last one of those, he got some notifications. You created a low-grade mana potion, low-grade mana potion, quality. Perfect, rank 0, description, a simple low-grade mana potion made of the Byron flower. Effect, recover 100 MP, alchemy reached level 100 and rank 0, upgrading to rank 1, it is now possible to use your mana in the creation of alchemical products, due to ranking. Up your alchemy, you gained +1 INT and +1 WS, Aizen stood up and grabbed some of the potions, telling his doubles to grab a few as well, although not as many as himself since the danger of them dropping the potions were significantly higher, and Bree was more than happy to take the rest of them. They brought the glass bottles to the front and placed them on the counter in front of Moram. Finished, eh? Did everything work out properly? He asked while closely inspecting the different potions, placing them into a small wooden box one after another. Aizen smiled and nodded in response. Yes, everything worked. There wasn't much to mess up after all, I guess so, but still, I know a lot of people that somehow messed up. Sometimes they accidentally added impurities, or somehow got the measurements messed up. But yours seem pretty much all perfect. Good job. Here's your payment. Moram smiled and handed Aizen a silver coin, which he quickly put into his own purse, which also completed the quest he got. So, was I right? Did your rank increase to 1? Moram asked while placing the box of potions underneath the table, then walked up to the door leading to the workshop. Yeah, actually. Pretty much perfectly so. And what do we do now? Aizen asked curiously and excitedly. Since his higher rank now allowed him to add mana when using alchemy, he was sure it somehow had to do with that. Now, well, make more potions. But higher rank ones. With a pretty specific goal in mind, actually. You're a limit breaker, right? Up to where did you get your title? 2, or 3, even? Moram asked curiously, surprising Aizen immensely. He wasn't sure where Moram was going with this, but he definitely wanted to know. I'm at the 3rd version, right now. The moment that Aizen said this, Moram's eyes began to glitter. Smugly, Moram crossed his arms and continued speaking. Perfect. You see, I'm actually also a limit breaker. And I need your help with something.